Earlier this spring, Pope Francis died, and for a moment, the whole world was turned to this question of what it is to be the Pope and how we choose a Pope and who the next Pope might be. And as someone who is really interested in how spiritual institutions work, I was reading a lot. There was this incredible wealth of information that was coming at us. And one article that stood out, it was an interview, was with a priest who had been very close with Pope Francis for years, who really understood him and his mission and his heart. And I don't remember his name, but much of the interview at the beginning was about kind of the politics of being Pope, especially in a world where people are so divided, and recognizing that there is a kind of liberal part of the Catholic Church and a more conservative part of the Catholic Church, and going into detail about how Pope Francis might be understood in how he was positioned in all of that complexity and what he wanted within it. And after they had unpacked this for a long time, the interviewer asked this priest, so what do you want to see in the next Pope? What kind of person do you want him to be? And the way that we arrive at that question, it's so clearly asking about politics, right? Do you want the next Pope to be a liberal Pope? Do you want the next Pope to be a conservative Pope? What do you want that Pope to uphold? And this priest, instead of responding in either of those ways, simply said, I want the next Pope to be a holy man. I was reading this on my phone and it completely stopped me. It wasn't what I expected. I know it wasn't what the interviewer expected. And I had to pause and I had to think about what this meant for me. Because there was something very powerful in that statement. And I recognize that within this feeling that I had when I read this statement about a holy man was also some recognition that much of what I speak to and have always spoken to would seem to be almost in opposition to the idea of the holy man. I know I'm always talking about, not holding up someone as extraordinary or special or different, not holding up experience as extraordinary or special or different, right? That all of this is so ordinary and available and mundane. And when I hear something like holy man, it feels like a challenge to some of that. Because the holy man feels holy, and holy feels special. And when I hear the phrase, I'm pulled toward it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what that means for me, what I think it might mean to be holy, and what it might mean in this tradition as well. And to do that, I wanted to share another story about something I read almost around the same time. I was in a bookstore and, if I have any time in a bookstore, I eventually find my way to whatever corner has the Buddhist books because I'm always curious what I'm going to find. And usually there are no surprises because I feel like it's the same books everywhere. But I saw this book and I don't remember the title. It was one I didn't know, and it was about Rinzai Zen. It was a Zen book. So I flipped through it, and almost immediately I stumbled on this story that I have to share with all of you because it was great. So the author is talking about his teacher and explaining that this is a story his teacher told, that at one point in his teacher's temple, there was a significant rat problem. Rats were there and they were multiplying, and no one knew what to do, and it was really impacting the practice. So the teacher explains that the first thing he did was he looked into rats and how rats work. And one of the things that he learned is that rats, when they're in groups, synchronize their breathing. They all start breathing at the same time. Now, I don't believe that's true. I think that's probably completely crazy. But in order for this story to work, we have to roll with this. We have to go with the premise. And the premise is that this teacher is saying that one of the things that he has learned about rats is that rats all synchronize their breathing. Okay. So the teacher goes on to say, once I learned that, I went and I sat in Zazen where all the rats were gathered. And I figured out how they were breathing, and I synchronized my breathing to their breathing. So that eventually we were just breathing as one being, in and out, and in and out. And once we were all together in this, all really breathing as one, I held my breath for 5 minutes until they all died. Uh, which is nuts. But 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 this story really captures something. And I should add, after this teacher tells this story about murdering all the rats through the power of the breath, he turns to the student and he says, and if you can't do the same, you can't call yourself a Zen monk. Okay. What I love about this story is that it captures a kind of extreme version of something that we actually recognize very well in this tradition. There's an image that we have, there's a kind of character that comes up who is a teacher, who is usually a priest. And in the telling of the story, we might even describe that person as a kind of sage or a holy man. But what I want to say, for lack of a better word, is that when we tell these stories, what we're talking about is a wizard. There's a kind of wizard character. I've mentioned in the past that when I first came to Zen, if I'm honest, I think my primary motivation might have been to become a Jedi. There was something in these stories, there was something being offered about power. That if I held myself in a particular way, if I had the discipline, if I had the aptitude, that I might become someone who holds a particular kind of power that is mysterious. I didn't know what that would be, but I wanted it. And the fact is, there are lots of stories, not always as explicit as the rat story, but a lot of stories that suggest that this is real. And that character, and I don't think I'm alone in this, is very satisfying. There's something wonderful about this character, this wizard. But what I'm thinking about, what I've been thinking about these last few months, is that part of what makes it so satisfying is that actually we can't imagine it. I can't imagine what it's like to be the wizard. I can't imagine what it's like to have some sort of magic. But I can imagine that maybe there's some path by which I become that person. And that once I am that person, if I were to find another wizard, that person would recognize me. We would get each other because we're part of this small club. And in this small club, you are in or you're out. I'm out. So it's a complete mystery to me what it means to walk around in the world holding that. But if I were in, well, then I would be in and I would know. I don't know how to get there. I can say after decades and decades and decades of sitting in Zazen, it's not through Zazen. There's something, right? That makes that character fun. Not unlike how it's fun to imagine being a superhero. I don't really know what it feels like to be a superhero. I just know it would feel powerful and that everything would be different. But because I'm not a superhero, I don't have the problems that superheroes have. I can stay here in my ordinary self and I can imagine this other thing. So why am I talking about the wizard? Because when we think about the wizard, and then we think about the holy man or the holy woman, this holy being, I think we understand that they are of a different quality and that that different quality points to a kind of tension that we carry all the time. I started searching around in my mind, asking who is a holy man? I think there are actually quite a few. One who comes to mind for me is Thich Nhat Hanh. Every story I've ever heard about Thich Nhat Hanh tells me that he was a holy man. What do I mean by that? If I ask myself what it means to be a holy man, it isn't to have some sort of wizard powers. It isn't to exert control over anything. It looks humble and it looks soft. It looks gentle. It looks curious. I have an idea whether I'm imagining him or if I'm just imagining this in the abstract, that there's a way of being in the world that is a holy way of being in the world. And has to do not with who I am, but with how I'm touching the world, how I'm holding it in my hands, how I'm treating it. My sense is that Thich Nhat Hanh had that gentleness and that curiosity and that humility. I've heard people tell stories about how, in contrast to the wizard, who, if he entered the room, you would know right away. Thich Nhat Hanh might have been standing next to you for 30 minutes and you wouldn't know. Because there's nothing that he was imposing. There's nothing extra that he was bringing. I mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh not only because he so easily checks these boxes for me, but also because I think there's a bit of an ironic twist around this, which is that in the years since he's passed, I hear over and over people trying to make him into a wizard. That now the stories about him start to turn into magical stories. Or people talk about objects that he touched as if the objects themselves have been imbued with spiritual power by him. Right? That narrative of the wizard is so compelling that even in the presence of the holy man, we'll trade for it. And in a way that seems sad, but I understand it. And the reason I think I understand it is that if we spend time with this idea of the holy man or the holy woman, I think we might start to feel a little scared. Because there's nothing about what the holy man does that I can't do. There's nothing about me in this moment that prevents me from holding the world in a gentler way. Nothing at all. There's nothing preventing me from bringing humility and kindness and softness and curiosity to this moment and to the next person I encounter, to the next being I encounter. Nothing is in my way. And that means I can't get out from under it. With the wizard, I have a free pass because I'm just not that. And so whatever responsibility the wizard holds, that's not my responsibility. Whatever responsibility a superhero holds, it's not my responsibility. But the responsibility that the holy man holds, even if there's no one on earth saying that I'm a holy man, I think maybe that responsibility is the same as my responsibility. And that capacity is the same as my capacity. It's been a few months now since I read that interview. And this idea has gotten hold of me. It's become a kind of new lens for me, moment to moment. What would I be doing differently right now if I were the holy man? And the answer is never something out of reach. Ever. I know I talk a lot about spiritual confidence. This for me speaks to spiritual confidence. But it also speaks to the question of what do we think is the ideal? Does the ideal of this practice come down to who I am? Or does it come down to how I am? Because if it's about who I am, I can actually be free of any burden of responsibility forever, just as long as I continue to fall short of becoming that person. But if the ideal of this practice is about how I am, then the full responsibility of the world is on me now. And it always has been, and it always will be. And I can't see any way out. And that's where I'll stop.